Picture this. You're a broke grad student grinding away on your thesis about some fantasy novel, and boom, you literally work yourself to death at 25. But instead of game over, you wake up as a 7-year-old girl in that exact novel world you were studying. Sounds cool, right? Wrong. You're Lilith, daughter of the most powerful duke in the empire, and your father Enoch just kidnapped you from the imperial family to give you a normal life. Here's the kicker in the original story. You get kidnapped back by the emperor, brainwashed into becoming a killing machine, and eventually die. Your father goes on a rampage, starts a revolution, and the whole empire burns. But now that you remember your past life, you know the entire plot. You know your dad's supposed to meet this kid named Cheshire who becomes his adopted son. You know about the revolution, the deaths, and the tragic ending. Armed with knowledge of a novel you read 1,000 times, can you rewrite this bloody story into something with an actual happy ending? Can you save your father, help the revolution succeed, and maybe, just maybe, survive past your 7th birthday? Let's dive into Lilith's journey to change fate itself. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. In a vast empire, there was a young family with a little girl named Lilith. But Enoch already had a plan prepared, and before leaving, he tenderly kissed his daughter's rosy cheeks. But she couldn't remember who. The only clear thing was that she was in a mess, but she decided it would be a relief, but the guy can't go with her. He doesn't have status. "What's up?" And Enoch told him not to worry about it. He'll take care of it, so the guy shouldn't stress. Cheshire didn't understand so much kindness from the Duke, but now he sees that this man with such social status is simply incredible. What a surprise! Only one explanation came to mind. Enoch is nice to him because of his daughter, little Lilith. And then he asked Lilith if she liked her dad, a question that seemed really strange to the girl. But he is her dad. Obviously, she has to like him. He's super nice and caring. Anyone would like him. Cheshire realized that the question had been a silly one all of a sudden. The girl proposed to her friend to also be the Duke's child, and this left him speechless. Then she explained that her dad is bad. And that just because he gave her life doesn't mean he's a father. The girl assured him that her dad would definitely accept Cheshire into their family. But the guy turned a bit, and with a sad voice declared that he didn't need any family. Then he showed that he had finished his drawing, to make sure if they were referring to the Duke with silver hair. Lilith declared that she only resembled him by hair color, and he asked the lady for permission to go to sleep. Lilith didn't argue with him, but then she was surprised. When the guy asked where the servant's room was, it turned out that Cheshire thought he would sleep there. It seems that his psychological trauma is deeper than it appeared, but Lilith didn't want to discuss it now, and she simply took him to her room and laid him down next to her. She watched him for a while, and Cheshire fell asleep quickly and very deeply. At least that's what it seemed. Afterward, she decided to clean his bruises with a handkerchief, hoping her movements wouldn't wake him. Literally before her eyes, the bruises started to disappear from his face. The girl was amazed, thinking it was her ability, but she couldn't forget his words that he didn't need a family. Although she understood that he was only saying that Cheshire dreams more than anyone of having a united family. Since his mother abandoned him and his father mistreated him, she whispered to him while he slept that she wanted to reveal a secret. Then she leaned a bit closer and whispered that he was the protagonist of this world. Those always face and overcome difficulties. And blue eyes. But her father's name is James Brown, and he looks like her mother, the knight who is still holding the girl. And no matter how much Cheshire suffers, Lilith promised to help him with a soft but quite proud voice. The girl declared that they would become a family. Having completed this little mission, Lilith felt her own eyes starting to close, and she lay down to sleep. She didn't see how after that Cheshire opened his eyes. It turns out he wasn't asleep and had heard everything. The guy turned to her and watched her for a while, convinced she was a strange girl. He was surprised that Lilith was going to look for the marquise and save someone she didn't care about at all. Cheshire thought it was just a whim of a noble girl, interested in common people. He felt like a disposable toy when she got bored, because he had seen many cases like that. But in reality, the boy was happy to finally lie down without hunger, and not wish to die at the hands of his father. And he was willing to take advantage of the fleeting interest of the young noble. At least that's what he thought. Cheshire still couldn't understand why Lilith had said they would be a family. It was strange, and he wished she wouldn't be so nice if she thought about getting rid of him. The boy no longer wanted to be hurt like that, and with those thoughts, noticed she was very smart. Then he called her by her name, and the girl was a bit puzzled. He turned to the other side and fell asleep. A few minutes later, the door opened. It was the Duke coming to check on the little ones. And he noticed that Cheshire was sleeping uncovered, so he approached and tucked in the blanket, so both children would be covered on the nightstand. Enoch saw a drawing by the boy and knew he drew very well. Then he decided to see what his daughter had drawn, and her artwork also looked like a jellyfish. But upon closer inspection, he realized his daughter wanted to draw him, and it would look better if she fixed the eyes and nose. After looking at the drawing for a minute, the father admitted it was quite a cute picture. Then the Duke leaned down and kissed his daughter on the forehead, wishing her softly sweet dreams for the next day. Lilith went to the lesson where Oscar was present. Through the window, she saw her new friend sitting on the street next to the fountain. Recap manhwa, and from his face it was clear he was sad. The lesson was very boring. Even Oscar was yawning, and the girl at that moment, not understanding how this guy knew her name. But then she noticed Dad James, who appeared unexpectedly in the clearing, holding a stick in his hand, and began to demand explanations, and also that they let go of his daughter immediately. The girl got worried, because talking like that to these people could lead to execution, and he even threatened them with death, and immediately started apologizing to the knight, saying that his dad had simply lost his mind and asked him to be lenient, because he is just a citizen of the empire, barely making ends meet, gathering firewood with his little daughter. Because he was just a citizen of the empire, barely making ends meet, gathering firewood with his little daughter. Upon exiting the main building, which looked like a battlefield, the father embraced Lilith. The knight in blue acted as if he didn't hear her, and simply threw her to another knight like she was a thing. But Lilith wasn't worried about herself. She started shouting so that they wouldn't do anything to her dad. The blue knight got off his horse and approached James Brown while he continued, demanding an explanation of what they wanted from his daughter. The knight called James Enoch and added that the emperor ordered him to return immediately to the order and fulfill his duty. But Lilith insisted that her father was not named Enoch, but James. His words fell on deaf ears for the knight, who reminded him that 7 years had passed, and it was time to end this. As according to military code, deserters must be executed immediately and are classified as criminals. However, the merciful emperor held Enoch in high regard for his past merits and abilities. Furthermore, no arrest warrant was issued, nor were his assets confiscated. Until now, all his illegal actions went unpunished, and they were waiting for him. He was ready to change fate. He couldn't let his daughter live the same horrible life in the battlefields that he had. Now the time has come to return. Then the knight repeated the emperor's order from today. Enoch must return to the order and fulfill his duty. Meanwhile, the knight stared at James, as if urging him to obey the order, but he remained still with an unperturbed face. Only a subtle smile curved his lips. He declared that the emperor's words remained a farce both in the past and now. Upon hearing this, Lilith became even more worried. Her father had crossed the line by insulting the imperial family. She started thinking about how to stop Dad and escape before something terrible happened. She bit the knight's hand that was holding her, and in surprise, he let her go. The girl fell to the ground like a little sack of potatoes. But without paying attention to the fall, she immediately got up and ran toward her dear dad. But she couldn't reach her target, because along the way she was grabbed by the neck again like a kitten. It was the captain of the knights holding her, but she kept kicking and shouting at her father not to do anything. After taking a few steps, Enoch heard his wife Selena's voice, who thought he was running away. Then she turned to that knight and began to apologize for her father's behavior. Her face seemed sincere, and she pleaded for her dad's life to be spared. She assured again that the knight had mistaken him for the color of his hair. She even agreed to cooperate with them to convince them of the mistake. She also promised to check everything, believing that Enoch was hiding and could help find him as long as they freed her dad James. Only then would Lilith agree to go with those people. The captain of the knights thought for a second, but the girl's plea did not move him. Holding her tight so she wouldn't escape, he pointed his sword at James, and suddenly a magical energy enveloped him. Lilith was very scared for her dad not understanding what was happening to him, but he was using magic himself, and in an instant the girl couldn't believe what she saw, a strange transformation. Her father was turning into someone different. His hair turned silver and his eyes blue. Lilith understood nothing. The man stopped but said nothing, and she noticed the baby in his arms and became very indignant. She always thought that the single father who raised her was James Brown. The captain returned the girl to the assistant. Ordering him to make sure she came to no harm, Lilith now understood that. Her dad was that powerful man that these people asked about. But the knight holding her was just following orders, and she immediately apologized, explaining that she had just found out at that moment a brilliant glow illuminated her. Coming from the magical flows of the wizard Enoch, he prepared to fight against the captain of the knights. And he continued cursing the emperor, believing it was funny, executing anyone who disobeyed his orders. And he was curious how the blue knight would force him to submit. What bothered him the most was that he dared to touch his daughter, and now he was going to punish him, however the captain of. Then she started scolding him, telling him he couldn't do that and take their daughter with him. The knights had no intention of letting Rubenstein go at that moment. His assistant placed a sword at the girl's neck and ordered Enoch to stop, also ordering him to surrender and follow them, or his daughter would suffer. But with that, he only made an irreparable mistake. Rubenstein exploded the moment the so-called Order of the Holy Knights dared to threaten his little girl, the captain. Ensured they were just following orders and had to take Enoch by any means. But he asked to relay that he renounced that name and would no longer obey the imperial family yet. The knight insisted that he could not choose now because it wasn't an offer but an order. The captain's assistant nodded, saying that if he wanted to ensure his daughter's safety, he had to surrender. The terrified girl didn't know how to help her dad, but she begged them to wait and listen to her before that. She thought her dad. Enoch then explained that he didn't want for her the same upbringing he had and wanted to move on. It was apparently normal, but was actually the hero Enoch Rubenstein. In his youth, he lost his little girl and unleashed the blood sword in revenge. And now the moment had come. With his daughter Lilith, he longed to return to his carefree life. But now he only saw one way out, and he pleaded with her to obey the order. He even assured the knights that her father would return to the order today. As long as they did nothing to her, they let them go and back at home. She shouted again that she was just a copy of her mom. She was still trying to understand the situation, and pressed her father about why he hadn't told her anything. The man apologized, but he couldn't have told her even if he had 10 mouths for her safety. And he was curious about how he had reacted so quickly in that situation as they bought some time. Enoch believed those fools had really believed them and released the hostage, and now there was a chance to pack up quickly and get out of there while the knights waited outside without seeing anything. But Lilith declared they wouldn't run away. But Selena declared that she was also his daughter, so he shouldn't dare to take her away from her mother, turning back to his wife. but would return to the capital and her father would be a knight again. The man didn't understand why his daughter said that, and she claimed that she wanted to live proudly. She also wanted to go to the capital with her dad, go to the academy, and earn the talented mark. This puzzled Enoch. He didn't understand how the girl knew about the academy and other details. She explained that she knew from her uncle, and the father was outraged, not understanding what she thought. That grumpy old man saying that to a girl. Then he stared at his little one and begged her to listen carefully. He knew that day would come, and that the horrible guys behind the door would find him. Enoch knew it. But still he fled because he didn't want his daughter to live as a gifted one. The life of an aristocrat seemed like paradise. And those who use magic are treated like royalty. Depending on their status, they receive titles and wealth. They just have to be loyal and obedient. But behind that privilege lies bondage. They must be the Empire's sword and give their lives serving the order. And on the battlefield, they are nothing but chained dogs of the Empire living in the most horrible place. Enoch proposed that they run away together, but the girl just laughed. His words sounded totally absurd to her. Enoch said goodbye to many comrades on the battlefield, and already the next day he wondered who would be next. He didn't know how long he could live like this, and he feared for his daughter. That's why Rubenstein didn't want Lilith's life to be like his. The day she was born, and he saw her for the first time. At that very moment, she became his world, and the idea that he could lose her consumed him. Saying this, he hugged his daughter tightly and tenderly. The girl understood her dad better than anyone. That's why she was willing to do what he wanted. But if he didn't come back, this country would fall into the original history. Enoch returned to avenge his daughter's death. Captain Cheshire meticulously planned the rebellion of the Knights of the Order, and he sparked a revolution in the country. That's why 10 years later, all the incompetents died by the Emperor's order from a massive extermination. It was literally a genocide of civilians stripped of magical powers, and only Enoch can stop it. And if they escape now, she noticed he was more impulsive than he seemed. Besides, they were free people because they were born. He won't take the lead role of Cheshire, nor will he rebel against the Emperor. Upon returning, Enoch will lose nothing but that way all the inhabitants like her won't die. Lilith didn't want to flee and watch the country crumble, especially because they would have to flee for the rest of their lives. Dad still not understanding if his daughter had told him she loved the happy and carefree life. Pouting a little, the girl explained softly that she had changed her mind, remembering the talented aristocrats. She believed she could also become a powerful aristocrat. Besides, she could eat something other than pasta every day and wear dresses with bows and ribbons. The girl understood that. She could use her knowledge to thwart Cheshire's plan where many people would die. Plus, with her return, they wouldn't have to chop wood and sell it at the store anymore, and she wouldn't have to wash here. The dad was outraged if he had asked her not to wash. Her father, Enoch Rubenstein, saw a little angel in her every time he held her in his arms. Nobles of the Empire. And it made no sense to run anywhere, but the main thing is they were bound to live and die for the Empire. But she kept doing it, realizing that she had let it slip. Lilith apologized, claiming she didn't want to act that way, but she just doesn't understand why he doesn't want her to live and seize all the opportunities if she wants to live like an aristocrat. And Dad didn't even bother to ask her opinion. He wants not just Dad to call her princess. The girl longs to be a true princess. And then for a moment she was filled with rage and let it out that she wasn't Dad's daughter, which shocked him deeply. Lilith declared that she would be the Duke Enoch's daughter. And if Dad didn't accept it, she would ask the uncles to take her. At that moment, the man was left speechless. He didn't expect such indignation from a 7-year-old girl. At the same time, he understood that she was right, and swallowing a lump, he agreed to her wish. They started to prepare, and Lilith never would have thought she would leave her beloved cabin like this. Now her ordinary life in the village was over, and she was anxious for what awaited her already in the carriage. The same applies to their daughter. Although Selena understood his feelings, since she also thought a lot about their daughter's fate. Lilith kept thinking about it, and at one point she buried her nose in her father's sleeve. He even worried if everything was okay with her, and she immediately lifted her head, asking what was outside the window. There she saw some silhouettes, and the captain explained to the Duke that they were werewolves. Rubenstein became uneasy. A pack of wolf-like monsters with huge jaws was approaching. It was common in the outskirts. But the knight didn't expect to see them so close and acted. Enoch couldn't wait. He decided to intervene, pleading with his daughter not to go out. Then he asked the captain to protect the carriage, swearing vengeance if Lilith was harmed. He decided to deal with the lycanthropes alone, confident he could resolve it much faster. Soon, he was close to the monsters, who, smelling human flesh, wanted to dine on him, while Lilith was in despair. Wondering why the commander wasn't doing anything, he assured her that the Duke would handle it. And he was right. Enoch's sword shone with magic instantly. Furry heads flew and bodies fell. Enoch gritted his teeth in anger, willing at that moment to do anything to save his little girl, spraying everything with blood. The girl opened her mouth in astonishment, watching the magic of the strongest, reading it as one thing, seeing it as another. Upon returning, Enoch asked the captain why he was standing like a fool when he was ordered to protect the carriage. He only praised the Duke, who resolved it in a second, but he didn't understand why to spend Mana and Lilith observing her father, understood that her status had risen too quickly. They arrived at the Southern Elves' temple, through whose doors they could enter the capital. The girl also changed clothes there because you can't enter the capital in simple clothes. Meanwhile, the knights were somewhat worried, asking if Duke Enoch was chasing her, and she assured them that everything was fine. Then they were curious what happens when her dad gets mad. And if he had ever raised his hand to the girl, Lilith didn't understand why they asked such strange questions. They were only worried because they knew what the Duke was like. but the girl assured them that he had never hit her or even scolded her harshly. On the contrary, he loved her a lot. Then she asked why those gentlemen considered her dad so terrifying. Suddenly, Selena simply asked him to leave. Then she turned and headed in the opposite direction, and before she left, one of them let slip that once Rubenstein tore apart a bear with his bare hands, which shocked the little girl. Moreover, she knew he was so cold that it was hard to get close to him. At that moment, the commander was near the portal. The gentleman asked him to confirm about the Duke. He stopped raising his head, and Lilith remembered that man. Now she understood why he seemed familiar. This action hero took the commander position when Rubenstein disappeared, and he was an important character. Not only did he possess incredible strength, but he also had an irresistible appearance. The gentleman whispered that Enoch almost killed the commander, but the creaking of the door interrupted their chatter. Lilith saw her father enter and immediately ran to hug him. He looked incredibly powerful now. Even if Lilith hadn't read the novel, she would know he was the protagonist, just by looking at his serious face. The girl stopped right in front of him, and Enoch leaned down toward her, then lifted her in his arms, pretending not to recognize her. Treating her like a little angel, he exclaimed with a surprised face that she wasn't an angel, but the very princess. Enoch confessed that he planned to go to Sinon, where he intended to find someone to end things. He always played like this with her, then hugged his daughter, saying she now looked like a beggar next to him. The commander watched all this, thinking it was too much, then asked them not to waste time and to leave right away. But Enoch couldn't stop admiring his daughter. Still, it was time to leave. And the Duke with his daughter in his arms stepped toward the portal. Everything was different on the other side, at least for Lilith. She looked at everything in fascination. Immediately, a group of priests welcomed them. They couldn't believe that the Duke had really returned. It had been a long time. Since their last meeting, the chief priest blessed his lordship and also asked if the Duke planned to return home right away, since they had to perform the return ceremony. The priests had everything ready upon hearing of his possible arrival, but Enoch postponed it. The trip was long, and his daughter was exhausted. After a while, they passed through the main street, and the girl was amazed by so many people. The knights. Selena wished him luck, after which the man with the baby in his arms embarked on a long journey. Escorted them, asking them not to get distracted and to go straight home. Lilith asked to walk, and even though it was 15 minutes away, the Duke lifted her up. She refused, because if she was carried, she would always forget how to walk, but she'd let him know if she got tired. She thought she should stay alert, even though the hero no longer thought of revenge. But Lilith did something that completely prevented the original story from starting. As they walked, the girl saw how everyone knelt before the Duke. They wished him the blessing of the first goddess, and it seemed that they wouldn't stop, although Lilith knew it would be too much. This is a land where people bow to greet, but this neglect of human rights is the central theme of her thesis. Now, he must find the other protagonist, Cheshire, and make sure he meets his father. Dad can't start a revolution alone, but Lilith wants to understand what that event meant. The novel doesn't say how they met, but if Lilith is alive, the Duke won't be interested in Cheshire, so the girl must force the meeting. But it's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Walking down the street, she noticed shadows sneaking in an alley, and her father stopped. That day, the only sacred sword of the Empire in Enoch Rubenstein disappeared, and 7 years passed since that day. He also believed there was a conflict, but he told her not to worry because there are patrols everywhere. Lilith objected that they should stop them, but her father didn't want his girl to take risks for something trivial, so he asked her not to be afraid and just walk, saying that her dad is so strong that nothing is scary. Translation: failed, translation, failed, translation, failed. The thugs thanked his lordship, and wishing him again the blessing of the goddess, they disappeared. Seeing all this, the girl was only convinced that the revolution was really necessary. She told her father that life in the capital was amazing, but then she remembered that boy was still there approaching him. She asked if he was okay, although his appearance said it all. Suddenly, she noticed blood on his face and asked to help him, extending a handkerchief to him. However, the boy immediately pulled his hand away, as if she were going to do something terrible. Lilith understood that he was scared and just apologized for touching him so suddenly, then placed the handkerchief on his leg. The following events took place in a village in a small house. The girl Lilith had already grown up, so that the boy could take care of the wound himself. She felt sorry because she had seen how they beat that kid. And at that moment, she was only thinking about that. But despite his wounds and the dirt on his face, that boy suddenly seemed very beautiful to Lilith. She was illuminated by a thought about the meaning of his jet black hair and red eyes. It's the world of the novel, and a rule persists. The girl understood that it was none other than Cheshire, just in case she decided to ask his name to confirm it. But he remained silent. As a grave, the Duke approached and asked how he felt, hoping the boy wasn't suffering too much. The kid just got up in silence and tried to leave, but his wounded leg prevented him, and Enoch offered him his hand. The red-eyed boy rejected the friendly hand again, as if it were offered to an enemy. But the Duke wasn't offended. He understood the boy's feelings. But Lilith couldn't calm down and asked the boy to wait. Her father stopped her, explaining that in the world, there are many people who hate nobles probably. That's why that boy felt uncomfortable. And she was always with her dad, who one day went to wake her up for breakfast, but she didn't want to get up. And the Duke suggested leaving things as they were. Lilith remembered again that this was the world of the novel, and the original script had to follow its course. She thought this was the mysterious encounter described as a coincidence following the path. Lilith asked her father if she could be friends with whoever she wanted. The Duke stopped. I didn't quite understand what she meant, so she clarified by asking if she could be friends with that commoner. Being a noble, Enoch thought it didn't matter if he was noble talented or just an ordinary person. Lilith can be friends with anyone. What matters to him is that his daughter is happy, And then Lilith got curious about where that boy had gone. For some reason, she kept worrying about him, even though she had just met him. She then confessed that he was the one she wanted to be friends with and asked her dad to look for him later. She was also interested in whether his wounds were treatable, and she wanted to talk to him. To this, the Duke just laughed sincerely and proudly declared that he had created an angel, picked her up, and promised to find that boy. And with her eyes closed, she begged him to let her dream for 5 more minutes, but her dad insisted, especially since he never said no to his princess. This made Lilith very happy, and in gratitude, she hugged her daddy tightly, while thinking that according to the plot, Cheshire should be living in the Marquis Onyx's mansion at that moment. Late at night in the Marquis's mansion, a certain Jonathan was being scolded for trying to get rid of that boy, and he shouted that he couldn't stand that brat in the house. But the father feared that if they threw him out on the street, his abilities might be discovered. The Marquis worried that an investigation would start about his origin, and that everyone would know he was his illegitimate son. He didn't want to tell the world about his existence, so he decided to simply lock him up and raise him in secret, but Jonathan screamed for them to kill that creature because he couldn't breathe the same air as him. The Marquis didn't expect such a declaration from his legitimate son, but he forbade him from doing anything like that, promising him, though, that in other matters he wouldn't interfere. The young Marquis, grinding his teeth, looked at his stepbrother with fury, but didn't want to anger his father. And when the old man left, as soon as she was born, he noticed she was identical to him like 2 drops of water. Her charm was undeniable. He had a sweet appearance and caring hands. His name was James Brown, convincing Lilith to wake up. He grabbed the boy by the neck as if he were going to hit him and insulted him with the worst words. Cheshire couldn't resist and just watched as the young Marquis's fist rose above him. He didn't even believe he could have any abilities, even if he was the son of a gifted one. At the same time, he felt very tired and simply closed his eyes, waiting for the inevitable. When they left him alone in the dark cell, the boy thought it would be easier to die, but he didn't even have the strength for that. In his pocket, he felt a handkerchief that a little girl had recently given him. And instantly, he remembered how she sincerely apologized for accidentally touching him. That girl seemed like an angel to him, but she was just a noble. And now he didn't understand why he had even accepted her handkerchief. In his head on that dark night, many thoughts were passing through. That girl seemed like an angel to him, but she was just a noble. And now he didn't even understand why he accepted her handkerchief on his head that dark night. Many thoughts crossed his mind, and turning to the side, he began to pray for death when the Duke and his daughter arrived at the gates. Recap manhwa. He confessed that he had prepared a princess breakfast for her fries with sausage. The girl was amazed. She never would have imagined it. The palace was incredibly huge. Before entering, Lilith asked her dad to wait a bit. She needed to mentally prepare herself. Besides, her dad hadn't been there in 7 long years. And when the gates finally opened, her dad hadn't been here in 7 long years. And when the doors finally opened, several servants rushed out to welcome the young master. The butler Rem was happier than anyone, unable to believe that the Duke had finally returned. Then the servant noticed the little girl and realized she was the young lady bending down to her level. He greeted her, and she introduced herself as Lilith. Then the butler stood up and bowing introduced himself to the young lady properly, asking her to just call him Rem. And the maids admired how the little girl seemed like an angel and noted that she looked a lot like the Lord. Enoch interrupted, asking Rem how much longer they would be separated outside, and he immediately invited them in, apologizing to the Duke and Lilith, explaining that it was the most emotional moment in his 50 years. Still with her eyes half closed, the little girl sniffed and also sensed the smell of broccoli hidden behind the egg. On the way, Rem confessed that rumors said the Emperor ordered the knights to bring Enoch, but no one expected this. Nonetheless, the elder Duke would be happy to see them, and Lilith remembered there was radiation pressure every time his name came up. Enoch Rubenstein has special abilities, and the pages about him were infused with greatness. In the original story, he was very kind to Cheshire, although he feigned indifference, but secretly he cared. Lilith hoped her grandfather would also be kind to her, although it would surely take a great effort on his part. Rem also announced that Lady Ordia, Enoch's sister, was there, since she always believed her brother would return. For the girl, it was the first time she heard her aunt's name since it was never mentioned in the original novel. After that, Ren promised to order the kitchen staff to prepare the best delicacies the Duke had ever tasted, and then they arrived at the entrance. And when the main door opened, Lilith was left breathless and shocked. Everything there seemed not only beautiful but real, as if it surpassed the Emperor. She doubted if the gold surrounding her was real. Making a face, the girl remembered that she didn't like it, but James insisted it was necessary, since almost everything was adorned with it. But it seemed like James' brain was hiding not only his power, but immense wealth. The Duke walked confidently, but the girl felt uneasy, and upon reaching Nordic's office, she panicked. The office was spacious, but it seemed covered by the shadow of the old Duke Rubenstein sitting at the table. Enoch's sister immediately exclaimed, covering her mouth, still not believing he had returned. Enoch greeted his father, and Lilith confirmed that Nordic's presence was not an exaggeration. Despite everything, she tried to calm herself when her father brought her closer to her grandfather. The old man stood up, but his greeting was more than discreet, and his face showed no happiness at all. Enoch noticed that his father had aged a bit since the last time they saw each other. But right there, Nordy leaned his cane against his son instead of hugging him. Hordia could only scream at him to calm down. There was a kid present, and that stopped him. And for dessert, he promised her almond and chocolate cookies with apple jam. Lilith, though small, the very Lilith clung to her father with all her strength, feeling him tremble. Nordic looked at the girl with doubt, but Enoch proudly declared she was his little princess. It seemed to offend the old man that his son had raised her. His daughter for only 7 years without letting anyone know he was still alive, apparently. Nordic thought his son had stayed away all those years because of Lilith. In the grandfather's place, the girl would also hate someone like her, but he didn't expect that reaction. Then he apologized to the old man, but Enoch was instantly outraged. His princess shouldn't apologize for anything, and he asked his father to soften his expression because that face was scaring the little one. Nordic murmured something and the girl cracked an eye open. She had tightly closed it from the scare. She saw that the grandfather was reaching out to her. She thought he was going to hit her and immediately closed her eyes again, imagining in an instant how it could all go down. However, Nordic knelt beside her and just gently touched her cheek, then stroked her silver hair. Understood that her dad was using a trick and was trying to convince her with a sweet to eat broccoli, but she didn't see herself as someone who would fall for that trap. When Lilith opened her eyes, she was visibly surprised, not understanding what was happening. But then she realized that the grandfather was being quite kind to her, and her father was quietly happy off to the side. Then she introduced herself to the old man and declared that she was very happy to finally meet him. Afterward, they had a nice family hug. And on the old man's face, there was no trace of anger. On the contrary, he seemed happy. Later, Hordia took the little one to introduce her to her cousins, who were also twins. They had always wanted a little sister, and the aunt was sure that Lilith would love them. These twins were also heirs of the ducal family entrust. One would become a holy knight, and the other a magical swordsman in front of their room. Hordia explained that Teo was somewhat weak, and she was worried. Then she opened the door and called her boys, asking them to greet their cousin and the girl. Remembered that in this novel, everyone dies, and these two died in the end. The twins were among the few who cherished. And she demanded 2 cookies. Dad, happy that his daughter was getting vitamins, kissed her on the cheek. She really opened her heart, and after her death, she almost went crazy. But anyway, they looked like someone had copied and pasted them. They immediately stared at the little one who entered, unable to believe she was so small. Yordi admitted they were so similar that when they wanted to trick her, even she could hardly distinguish them. Leon and Teo explained that their uncle had returned some time ago. Then they introduced the little Lilith. Explained to Leon and Teo that their uncle had returned some time ago, then introduced them to little Lilith. The first to greet her was Teo, declaring that he was already 12 years old. The girl remembered that in the original story, he died first. He became a holy knight. He also had a kind and caring character and looked after Cheshire like a true older brother. But in spring, after being named a knight, he tragically passed away due to a congenital illness. However, that would happen in 4 years, and now Lilith greeted him cheerfully. Leo was standing to the side, and his mother asked him to come over and greet his cousin. The boy joked, saying the girl was lying about her age since he was much taller at 7 years old. Besides all this, the 7-year-old girl, aside from her routine, then Ordia smiled and explained that her children, although they look the same, have very different personalities. Teo is kind and sweet, while Leo is mainly mischievous, and that worried her a little, which immediately outraged him, and his mother asked him to behave more calmly, reminding him that if he kept acting like that, no girl would like him. She also reminded him how he scared the dancer with a giant spider, to which the boy declared that the lady liked spiders. His mother was sure that girl just wanted to impress him. That's why he said it. But no lady would like that. Leo was playful and chatty, which often caused disputes with Cheshire, although not serious. He wanted it in the novel. Leo died in a massive battle to exterminate monsters covering for Cheshire. That part of the novel was written heartbreakingly. Lilith almost cried remembering him. But now she greeted him, offering to be friends and even hunt spiders together. She declared that she also really liked spiders, but actually just wanted to get closer to him. It was then that she noticed Leo's brother, remembered her past life, although she was a girl like any other and lived with a rank 9 bachelor, was looking at her strangely. And then he took her chubby pink cheek and squeezed it a little, like a piece of cotton candy. But it seemed the boy miscalculated the strength and it hurt the girl a lot. She even screamed. Hordia got scared by the little one, and Teo yelled at his brother for pinching her so hard. Lilith herself understood that it hurt, but didn't want to cry, and it just happened. Just then, she remembered the story, and Teo started fluttering around her, begging her not to cry. Ordia began to scold her mischievous son for not standing there, and immediately apologizing for what he did, aware that he had acted wrong. The boy apologized to the little girl, who assured him that nothing serious had happened. She even apologized for suddenly crying, and assured him that it hadn't hurt her at all. Just asked him to be a little more gentle next time. Since her skin is very sensitive, Leo had already noticed that, but still felt his mother's critical and warning gaze on him as night fell when dinner time arrived. Her father, and no matter what happened, Lilith thought they lived happy and peaceful days. The memories. Lilith couldn't believe how extravagant the appetizers were. They seated her at the table between the two brothers, and when everything was ready, they could start eating. Aunt Ordia asked the little girl to eat more, worrying about her health. Lilith was a bit confused because there were many utensils, and she didn't know where to start or what to do, but then decided to first look at Leo sitting next to her, so she would know which utensil to use at that moment. The door opened, and the great Duke Rubenstein entered the dining room. Only Enoch was missing, who had promised to join after unpacking his things. Lilith now understood what dishes the nobles ate, but she was so nervous that she couldn't tell if they were delicious. Recap manhwa. Suddenly Grandpa turned to Leo. Telling him that he knew about the commotion caused by the boy, he immediately explained that his son apologized to the dancer but Enoch doubted whether she would recognize him as her father. He's her blood and flesh offering her unforgettable love. Yet he felt strange. Of her past life emerged when she was 3, and by 7 she remembered everything. She herself would meet with her to apologize for her tone. Lilith realized that something more important had happened, although they had only talked about the spider before. But then Grandpa explained that Leo was already 12 years old, so he should understand the meaning of the name Rubenstein and always carefully check and control his actions. To avoid any kind of problem, he must follow protocol and not act without sense, as well as behave in a way that others admire him. The elder also hoped not to hear anything that would tarnish the family name. He was the perfect example of a noble family. Her speech seemed so dignified that she almost cried. She had never studied etiquette, and now felt embarrassed she didn't know how to eat a steak. She decided to wait, hoping to see how others did it, but Leo noticed that she wasn't starting to eat. Teo also noticed that she wasn't holding the utensils, and assumed she was already satisfied. Her aunt caught the worry without understanding what was happening to the girl. Lilith felt like the center of attention, and she didn't know whether to confess that she didn't know the rules. Her aunt and grandpa knew she didn't use cutlery, but she was worried about disappointing them even more. The world she arrived in was from a novel she read in her previous life. In the past, she was not happy. And to top it off, Dad still hadn't shown up who could fix something in the situation right at that moment. Enoch entered the dining room apologizing for his delay. Lilith. Internally, she was glad that her savior finally arrived, inviting her to eat with him right away. Suddenly, a shriek from Audra pierced the space. Looking worriedly at his son Leo, the boy grabbed a huge piece of meat with a fork and began to chew eagerly. With no manners, his brother Teo mimicked his behavior carelessly, cutting a piece of meat as if it were the first time. This further outraged their mother, who didn't understand why he couldn't behave properly at the table. But Teo just handed the cut meat to Lilith for her to eat and kept his portion. Then the girl realized that these kids treated her with a lot of attention and noticed that she had trouble with the utensils. She was so happy to have such wonderful brothers that a satisfied smile spread across her face. But her mother was worried about such behavior. As if the boys wanted to be scolded, she immediately apologized to their father, but he asked her to stop. She was a graduate student and considered herself unworthy, and at her flowery 25 years, she died from overwork while writing her thesis, which was a bit surprising for her. And skewering a piece of meat with a fork, the elder simply asked them to start eating. Everyone began to eat in silence, and when Lilith took her first bite, she felt incredible pleasure. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw her father watching her and smiling as if he had won a prize. And noticing her grandfather's questioning look, the girl declared that the food was very tasty. The grandfather nodded in approval and asked his granddaughter to eat more. After dinner, Enoch took his daughter to her new room, which was huge and filled with toys. The girl was on cloud 9 with joy and even danced, celebrating that she would live in such luxury, and upon seeing the soft, fluffy bed, she fell onto it and sank into the comforter, like in a cloud. Enoch approached her and asked if she remembered the boy they had found in the alley. Upon receiving an affirmative answer, he confessed that he had practically found him, that it was very close. He suggested to his daughter that as soon as she finished, she should ask the boy if he needed help. The thesis was about the novel The Uprising of Dosa, and writing it caused her a lot of stress, which is why she was transported. Lilith thanked him but asked him not to rush. She understood it would be difficult to find Cheshire now. They had crossed paths by chance before, and according to the original story, they wouldn't meet her father for another 2 years. Right now, he's hiding on the Marquis Onyx estate, and her father has just returned and doesn't know how the capital works. He's not one to trust illegal guilds that operate secretly to look for someone. Still, the girl understood she had to help in some way, and told her father not to worry and to go to sleep. In the morning, the butler introduced her to the maids Yeti and June, who would take care of her while her father was busy. He had to resume his duties after 7 years of absence. Rem also informed that these maids are very experienced and will be excellent helpers. Yeti was the first to introduce herself and list her merits, and she also draws and cooks wonderfully. June is her younger sister and also has quite a talent, primarily noted for her excellent physical condition. And now she swore to serve Lilith with soul and heart. Now with those memories, her life seemed distant and unreal, and she felt empathy for her past life. And at 7, she already thought like an adult, although her childish version. The girl didn't fully understand what those skills were for in taking care of a baby, but still appreciated them. June took the little one in her arms, and both maid sisters started admiring how adorable she was. The butler interrupted them, saying it was time to finish the introductions, and he prepared to inform Lilith of the schedule. The Lord had instructed them to start her education from today, and the teachers were supposed to arrive by 10 a.m. From the faces of the servants, it was clear they regretted a little that she had to study on the second day of arriving in the capital. Still, Lilith wanted to study. She was good at it and promised to do her best. The first class was math, and the teacher, Countess Lena, started with an apple problem. They had to solve an equation, of the kind normally learned in elementary school, asking them to multiply 2 apples by 2, and then add 2 more. Leo replied instantly that it would be 6. The teacher asked him not to rush and to give the young girl a chance to answer. Of broccoli made itself known when Dad did her hair. He treated her like a baby, offering options. Lilith herself liked when others answered for her, since math had always been difficult, unlike the humanities. The teacher told her not to worry, and that it was okay if she made a mistake. She even offered to suggest the answer. Leon whispered to his sister that she wasn't obligated, which infuriated the teacher again, who asked him not to interrupt. Meanwhile, Lilith thought she didn't have time for lessons, because she needed to find Cheshire. At 11 years old, she became part of their family. Now at 11, she would have to endure 2 years of hardships imposed by the Marquis. Lilith didn't want that boy to suffer and planned to help her father find him as soon as possible. First, she needed to find the guild leader, who would become her father's ally in a few years. But to meet him, she first had to get out, but they wouldn't let a kid go out alone, especially not in the middle of class. Unconsciously, the girl completed the entire table, and Elena didn't understand how she had done it. The siblings were also surprised to see her paper noticing that their sister was very smart, especially because Lilith solved the multiplications by 19 without extra calculations. And even she was astonished, but she only asked for a ponytail. For some reason, she was shorter than the 5-year-old boy next door. The girl understood that this could end badly, since a 7-year-old couldn't solve that table, although on the other hand, there are prodigy kids. So the situation might not be that serious, and if she finishes her studies quickly, she can start helping Dad sooner. Then she explained to the teacher that she managed it because she had explained everything very well, and reminded her of Lena. She had started with the example of apples that needed to be multiplied. Even so, the Countess was perplexed. Since she hadn't explained the table of 19, the girl asked her not to worry about it, and instead told her a bit more about multiplication. Here, the Countess declared that the young girl was a talented genius born once every 100 years. Then taking the little one by the hand, she promised to do everything possible to help her with her learning. The girl was happy, but at that moment she didn't know that this action would later lead her to a huge catastrophe. Shortly after, when lunchtime arrived, Lilith tried the dessert and was incredibly ecstatic. It wasn't just delicious, it was the best in the world. Although her dad didn't think it was serious, she had the mind of an adult, but didn't want to reveal that secret and acted like a kid. The best thing that could be eaten at all. The siblings advised her to try other dishes and stuffed. Pieces everywhere. She stuffed the delicacies in both cheeks, making her look like a squirrel. But at the same time, she looked very cute. The aunt was also happy that the girl was eating a lot, only asking her to eat more slowly so she wouldn't get indigestion. From outside, the sound of an arriving carriage was heard, and Orty noted with excitement that it was the Countess Ballerina along with her guest, her daughter Erica. They greeted the host from the street. Leo suddenly decided to hide behind her, but Lilith clarified that he was completely visible. Then Teo explained that his brother didn't like Erica very much, and days earlier scared her with a giant spider. The girl was very upset, and Leo received a good scolding from his mother, so he didn't want Erica to see him. But just at that moment, Erica walked into the room, and upon seeing Leo, she headed straight for him. Seeing that he was trying to hide behind the little girl, the young countess demanded an explanation of what was happening. Suddenly, the tension was palpable in the air. Erica knew nothing about her sister Lilith and demanded to know who that girl was. She asked for bunny ears, which always melted her dad's heart, who immediately, her speech laced with jealousy seemed a bit strange to Lilith, more fitting for a medieval romance novel. Then she barged in asking about Erica's forehead, who responded that she should ask who that girl was, and found out she was the boy's cousin, who had returned yesterday with Duke Rubenstein. Erica felt uncomfortable explaining that they hadn't told her anything about it. Her mood changed instantly, and addressing the Duke's daughter, she complimented her, saying she looked like an angel. Then she admitted to feeling a bit jealous of her for Leo, and introduced herself as Erica, a 12-year-old dancer. In response, Lilith also introduced herself politely, not forgetting to compliment her appearance. Erica smiled, and just in case, confessed that she had already promised to spend her whole life with Leo. This outraged Leo himself, but Erica continued talking about future family plans, completely ignoring him. Lilith realized that the girl was serious. Apparently she liked bad boys, judging by how clingy she was. That night, her father literally burst into Lilith's room, opening the door so abruptly that she jumped, and then immediately ran to hug her, because she had missed her a lot all day, tried to kiss her pink and chubby cheeks, something she didn't like. Dad loved her anyway. When her excitement calmed down a bit, they talked about dinner, and Enoch confessed that he had eaten recently, and the daughter recounted how she'd gone with her aunt and brothers to the tailor where they took her measurements and bought her some clothes. She loved shopping, especially for a dress that was identical to a princess's. Then Enoch asked her about her studies, and his daughter admitted that she had been studying for several hours. The father apologized, explaining that the grandfather had insisted on some extra classes, but the girl wasn't upset, understanding that one must learn everything, and besides, she found it fun. This surprised Enoch a bit, and his daughter promised to let him know if it became tedious and boring. After hearing her, Enoch admitted that the teacher had praised her a lot and had called her a genius. She never doubted it. She didn't see it as something amazing, since that's learned in elementary school, but she was glad her father was happy. He hugged her tightly again and started to pamper her, hinting that she had inherited her intelligence. By then, Lilith was already having a lot of fun and laughing out loud, constantly agreeing with him. It was as if something was tearing him apart inside. Like most aristocrats of the empire, his daughter was conceived to perpetuate the family lineage. And after getting her ready, he prepared to go to the market, leaving Lilith with Aunt Susan. He couldn't take her with him. Then she became curious about what her daddy had done all day, although it was obvious he had a lot of work, but she loved seeing her father proud. She even started to believe she was a genius when the next lesson arrived. The girl realized she had gotten a bit carried away with her genius. The teacher was Robert Queen. A guy working at the Magic Tower in the talent study department noticed his daughter's anxiety and told her to calm down. He advised her to respond calmly to that man, and even suggested that if she didn't know something, she shouldn't be afraid to admit it. After a while, when the professor reviewed the results, he had to admit that the girl was a genius. In this world, if children have talent for things like math, The magic tower keeps an eye on them to train them. Earlier, the grandfather contacted the tower to evaluate Lilith, but Enoch got mad because Nordic didn't even consult him, but the elder explained it was a normal test, and that his granddaughter would go to the magic tower anyway, and if the result was good, Enoch could act more freely while Lilith trained in the Empire Pavilion, all with special abilities. Because nearby there was a military squad of scary guys. The girl insisted she was strong enough and not scared, but James insisted it was too dangerous. They must be called to service and the tower takes care of that, and after announcing his decision, Nordic called the very Lilith to talk during the conversation. The grandfather told her not to worry, and just do the same as in class. Now Lilith understood that she shouldn't have exaggerated, since the situation took an unexpected turn for her. In magic, formulas are indispensable, and those who create them are workers of the magic tower. All of them are math geniuses. That's why the tower seeks talents and prepares their training from a young age. The girl remembers that this was described in the original, but she didn't think everything would turn into such a catastrophe. Now she felt not like a genius, but like an idiot. And after the test, they introduced her to another person in the room. Sitting on a carved chair was Oscar Manuel. He is the youngest chief of the magic tower in history. Lilith forgot all her problems for a moment. She didn't even dream that she would meet such an important character. The chief of the tower is her enemy. Her father was preparing for a rebellion. Recruiting high-ranking talents, nobles, and politicians were on Oscar's side. Those elite soldiers arrived in town by order of the Emperor to find skilled knights, and he never helped Lilith's father. If they had had the support of the magic tower where he is key, the revolution would have ended 3 years earlier, but Lilith isn't sure if Oscar supported the Empire. She could never understand his motives, and decides to pretend to be a genius and join the magic tower to win Oscar's favor. After that, she felt much better. She would just have to solve problems like yesterday, and when Professor Robert showed the results to her father, he convinced himself that Lilith is a genius, but Oscar for some reason was dissatisfied. Saying he didn't come to see childish things then in a brusque tone, ordered everything to be thoroughly checked, and opened another problem on the board. They gave the girl a linear equation, and Oscar suggested she try it. Doubting her success, she didn't think she could solve it. It seemed crazy to her, and she noticed that the man was obsessed with genius. She simply declared that she didn't know the solution, which shocked the chief of the tower a lot. Right away, the teacher told him not to worry, since even prodigies usually can't solve it at 7 years old. In the novel, humanity was divided into two, those who use magic and serve in battle and those who cannot. Then Enoch picked up his daughter and stated that the task was very difficult, but his princess was a genius. The only one dissatisfied was the head of the tower, thinking he had wasted his time on a stupid girl. He started to leave and Lilith understood that this was bad, just when her father asked Oscar to wait. He insisted that he repeat his words, and immediately called Lilith a stupid girl who made him waste his time. This enraged the Duke, and in a furious tone, demanded that Oscar apologize to his daughter, but he believed they should apologize to him for making him waste. An hour and a half, he only came because he was curious to see the daughter of that Enoch Rubenstein. Now he was sure that she was like other kids and just got lucky solving the number problem. But the Duke insisted that no one else would do what she did at 7 years old after this. He demanded apologies again from the head of the tower, but Oscar flatly refused to do so. The atmosphere grew tense. Enoch was about to unleash his anger, and Nordic was barely holding him back then. The grandfather apologized himself to Oscar and asked to leave everything as it is. In the novel, humanity was divided into two, those who use magic and fight in battles and those who can't. Regretting not meeting expectations to this, the head of the tower also insulted the elder, declaring that from his sharp mind, that he once respected so much. Nothing remained. Lilith heard all this, and she wasn't going to let anyone who insulted her family get away with it. Oscar's words about her being useless with empty dreams only pushed her to take the next step, and also his advice to the Duke to focus on the family, that he had abandoned and to guide her properly. And then Lilith declared that she would solve that equation, shocking everyone present. Recap manhwa. The girl only asked for 5 minutes to solve it, but set a condition if she succeeded. Oscar would personally apologize to her father and grandfather for his foolish words with a grimace that mimicked a smile. The head of the magical tower agreed, but Enoch worried and begged the little girl not to force herself to do it. But the girl had already made a decision, and for 5 minutes everyone watched as she intricately drew with chalk on the blackboard. And when she wrote a column of several simple equations, she turned to Oscar and declared that he was 17 years old. Those who used magic had privileges and could be nobles. The Empire has a system that classifies the mages, but they often fight in wars. Upon seeing the brilliant solution, he admitted his defeat and bowed to apologize to the Dukes. Lilith was curious why that guy had suddenly become so polite. She thought he would stay outraged. In his eyes, she now saw a kind of madness, with which he made a proposal about Lilith's education. But she expected nothing less from a person of that level, although the girl didn't fully understand what was happening. After that, they had dinner with the head of the magical tower, and he even offered to train the girl personally. She accepted only because it was an opportunity to try to win him over to her side. But while trying to do something, everything got worse. And when he saw him walk through the door, he was unexpectedly scared. Oscar entered and thanked for the food. Then he sat down calmly, and at that moment, he seemed like a completely different person. It was then that the boss proposed to the girl to do a bit more math. What wouldn't you do to achieve your goal? And Lilith agreed again without further objections. He started to explain how to create a magical formula and mathematically express the concept of space. It's not uncommon for them to die mercilessly on the battlefield like heroes. The novel didn't mention the incompetent ones. From this, the girl understood that magic is very systematic, and then she discovered that there are numbers less than 0. Oscar showed the equation. Actually, Lilith knew it, but decided to pretend it was the first time she'd seen something like that. It was obvious that the tower's boss was going to tell them about the concept of negative numbers. Suddenly, Oscar blurted out unexpectedly that the girl looked not only small, but tiny. He also thought that for being 7 years old, her height was abnormally low. There was a good reason for that, but Lilith had the impression that he knew something about it. Then Oscar ventured that it was because she ate very little, and that's why she was growing so slowly. The girl didn't know if he was talking nonsense, or if he truly ignored her big secret, and the boss insisted that she should eat more to grow and thus work together. Working in the magic tower would make her life easier, and although she didn't want to, she promised to think about it. At night, Lilith remembered that she wasn't the only one who had noticed that she was very small for being 7 years old. Before, she thought she was a side character, and that she simply grew slower than other kids. That was how Lilith and her dad were, but now they just lived their lives, and even Lilith. But there was a reason for it, something natural for the Duke's daughter who actually wasn't kidnapped by the Imperial family. She was an unhappy side character until her death was revealed. While Lilith was thinking about it, her dad came in and calling her genius again reminded her that it was time to sleep. The girl was getting a bit tired of that nickname and begged her dad not to call her that anymore. But her father didn't understand why, since she had done it too and the grandfather had a strange smile on his Nordic face. He always taught his son to be cold, but today he himself didn't hide his excitement. However, Lilith still had a lot to think about and asked her dad to go to sleep. But the father decided that he simply wasn't sleepy and offered to read her an interesting children's book. The story he prepared to read her was called The Princess Trapped in the Tower. Enoch liked to read books to his daughter, and although she didn't like it, she patiently waited for him to finish. The Duke began to read about how once there lived a king and a princess, and he loved his daughter very much. Over time, the princess turned 7 years old, considered it a huge luck to have been born incompetent because this world is pretty strange, and she was very happy to be alive. And the evil king from a neighboring country kidnapped her. The princess's father cried every day and offered treasures to the evil king, even to be his servant. But he still refused to return the princess at this point. Lilith felt a chill. She didn't understand how they could separate a father from his daughter, and then realized the story sounded familiar. The good king, consumed by sadness, one day met a boy, and this boy was very strong. The king took him in as a son, and believed that one day he would meet the princess and be a good brother to her. At this moment, Lilith prayed that the story would continue. It was becoming fascinating, and she heard that one night the evil king told the good king that the princess had fallen ill and died. Now Enoch was worried, not understanding what was happening with this story, but his daughter insisted he keep reading. She explained that the evil king might be lying and believed that the princess was still alive. Then the Duke read that the kind king became furious and decided to take revenge on the evil king. Together with the prince, they defeated all the villains of that kingdom, peacefully with her dad for a moment. The girl's reflections made James pause and captured the evil king preparing to execute him. This story felt very familiar to Lilith. The plot resembled Enoch Rubenstein's novel. She saw her father in the role of the kind king avenging his daughter's death, and that princess was herself, Lilith Rubenstein, so that the Duke's kidnapped daughter would return. He entered the battlefield countless times, and when he learned that his daughter had died, his sword was aimed at the emperor. His daughter lived using a secret identity. The emperor discovered her, hid her, and used his power. The princess, deceived by the emperor, began to kill people uncontrollably. Enoch Rubenstein wanted to get his daughter back, but he could never find a way. And in the entire empire, there was only one person capable of stopping her. Reaching that tense point, Enoch decided to stop reading. It wasn't a children's story. In the future, he would review the stories before reading them to his daughter. But she insisted that despite everything, the ending was happy. Something that surprised Enoch, and Lilith explained that if they hadn't kidnapped the princess, that's why Enoch thought he wouldn't feel anything. But this creature carries his blood, and when she grows up, she'll become a great person. Thinking, but still he didn't think much of it. He was just glad that the little one was happy, and for him that was the main thing. The good king would not take revenge on the bad one. He didn't feel sorry for the princess, because the king brainwashed her and killed many people. Enoch didn't see a happy ending, because the princess died, something that Lilith denied. And the father explained that the good king was the hero, and his beloved daughter died. That's a tragedy. In the end, everyone lived happily, except the protagonist. What irony. And if the protagonist isn't happy, it's a bad ending. A father who loses his daughter cannot be happy. While Enoch explained, Lilith remembered that in the original story, everything ended well. After Cheshire hit Enoch Rubenstein's daughter, everything ended with the description of the birth of a new empire. However, Pacifico felt curious about what happened to Dad after the original story ended. He didn't know if the protagonist was happy in the peaceful country built on his daughter's grave, and then wondered how Enoch would live after his death. If he were a good king and she a princess for a moment, the Duke was horrified, and then declared that in that case, he couldn't live at all. Then he assumed that in that fairy tale, a good king might think exactly the same way. Getting ready to leave, he asked Aunt Susan to take care of Lilith while he was gone. And when he discovered that the princess was dead, he wouldn't follow her right away because he planned to do it after his revenge. Suddenly, Lilith realized that her daddy would also die. And he explained that she would understand when she had her own children, and embracing her daughter Enoch repeated that if he lost his princess, he would follow her. This only upset the little girl more. She even screamed as if she had just had a nightmare. Then the Duke explained that it was just a story, and that he wouldn't allow something like that to happen, and if such a thing occurred, he wouldn't offer the wicked king to be his servant. Instead, he would rescue the princess from captivity right away. Suddenly, Lilith asked if all the gifted had to go to the battlefield, when the emperor ordered it. Enoch confirmed it, but also repeated what he had said before, that his princess didn't have to do it. The girl hesitated, because if it turned out she had a powerful ability, she would be obliged to go. It turns out the Duke already had a plan that he didn't consider special, but he didn't say what it was because it was already time for bed. But Lilith could already imagine what her dad was talking about because soon, and promised to come back really soon, a neighbor, a red-haired bearded guy, came to visit them. And he couldn't believe such a young dad. She was going to have a personal meeting with the emperor, and most likely she would ask His Majesty to free her daughter from service. Besides, the exchange is obvious for the emperor. From now on, the Duke will be a dog that obeys without protest. Just like in that story, the good king could do nothing but serve the wicked king, and even if his daughter wasn't kidnapped, Dad would still not be free because he would ask for her to be released from service in any case. The good king will be a pawn of the wicked, and fight in a war where victory is impossible. His dad is the main hero, who hates empires like this that follow the path of tyranny and conquest. Now he can't forget his words about the evil ending of the story, because his father won't be able to live without his daughter. Lilith used to think that her daughter was the beginning of the story, but in reality, it's a decision of revenge. Every action of the Duke was made for a goal, which was her, and in the end, everything ended in tragedy. It turns out that Lilith's goal is now not just to help Dad with a peaceful ending. She herself must survive. If she stays with her father and is safe, had come to their remote village. Susan also recounted how one night he arrived at her door at dusk. Then it doesn't matter what happens next. Lilith is sure that after the ending of the original story, the Duke Rubenstein will get his happy ending. And that's why she promised herself to do anything for her father. In this empire, there exists an organization that controls the gifted and divides them into 6 ranks. One of them is called the First. It is the source of all magic, and the omnipotent being the closest thing to a god. Because of this, the First is born only once per generation, and has only been born into the imperial family. The rank of the 12th prince was defined as 4th, and the emperor was furious that none of his 14 children were born first. This began to cause concern among the people. His Majesty feared that he would never have one, but the wizards asked him not to worry. Emperor Nicolas Bonpavillon is still young and healthy, so he will surely have a first one. It was 7 years ago when Enoch left. The emperor was enraged because the absence of the Duke was a great loss of power, but Nicolas waited. He knew that the omnipotent First brainwashed even talented people, but that requires a considerable amount of life force. Holding little Lilith in his arms, the man insisted that the girl wasn't sick, but she wasn't eating anything, especially if the target is someone like Enoch Rubenstein. His Majesty had to endure a lot to regain strength over the past 7 years. The emperor who holds the title of conqueror was still suffering due to various nations. Now Nicholas learned that Duke Rubenstein had returned with his daughter. This is a great gift for the emperor, and soon only the name of the empire will remain on the continent. The next morning, Lilith had to go to the study room, and the maids took care of getting her ready. The girl was sitting on the bed with her feet dangling, not touching the ground, and she remembered that they called her short. She understood it herself. Her growth seemed to have stopped, and that worried her, because if this continues, everyone could discover who she really is, and something urgent needs to be done about her height. But first, the first point of the plan needs to be fulfilled, and then get to the Skill Development Institute as soon as possible. That's where the talents go. To gain the Emperor's power and focus her abilities, Lilith must start using her powers now. If she absorbs life force, she will grow like the others at that moment. Even though he gave her the bottle, she just cried, understanding that the little one had been through a lot. Susan invited them into her house, and then set out to examine her. The maids were whispering about the 12th Prince 4th. Rumors say that the gods have abandoned the imperial family and no firsts are being born anymore. To June, this seems strange, since normally the first or second child always had that power. Yet he nodded. There are many princes, but still no first heir, a being with absolute power, that is born once per generation, and only in the imperial family, but it seems this emperor has been deprived of that pleasure. And Lilith even felt happy. The maids thought that the first might have been born into another family. Although it sounds ridiculous, they continued dressing the little girl and gave her a bunny head-shaped backpack. After thanking her, the girl put it on immediately. Now it was time to start her rescue mission. When the maid lifted her to say goodbye, Lilith asked where the infirmary was. That question seemed a bit strange to June, but still he explained how to get there. Soon after, the girl knocked on the door, and a young man who looked like he just woke up peeked his head in. Seeing the young Duchess surprised him, but she just greeted him kindly, calling him Flynn. For the girl, she prepared apple puree with milk, which she ate and asked James to feed her. The girl was already 5 months old. The boy was very surprised that the girl knew his name, since he hadn't even had time to introduce himself. Lilith explained that her sister had told her about him. Like a good doctor who helps in any situation, he immediately affirmed that she was perfectly healthy. While giving him some flowers she had cut from the garden, this cheered Flynn up. Now, the somewhat dull atmosphere would be perfectly adorned with a vase of flowers. The girl didn't waste any time. She asked if the doctor had fairy tears, also called salvation. It's a wonderful medicine, and Lilith wanted to know where to get them. It's a pretty rare plant, and the royal family keeps a close watch on it. It's only given to a few families once a month, but as a direct descendant of the Rubenstein family, Lilith has the right to it. The doctor considered her a suitable candidate. Seeing her good mood, the girl asked him to give her some to prepare, tea for her dad. Her care for her dad really touched Flynn, and without hesitation, he agreed to give her some of the medicine. He then handed her a form and asked the girl to write her name there. And with her crying, she clearly showed her dad that she wasn't satisfied with just milk. The next day, very quickly, Lilith wrote down her details. And after receiving her portion of medicine, she put it in her backpack. Now she needed to get out, but for that, she needed a companion. They wouldn't let her go alone for anything in the world. She started to think about who was strong enough to help her get out and protect her. While she was outside, she first thought of Yeti and June, but then the girl felt that wasn't the best idea. Her thoughts turned to her personal guard, but she didn't consider Mr. Luis a suitable candidate either. The best warrior of the Rubenstein family's personal army wouldn't work for this either. The answer came to her on its own. When her cousins approached and proposed to play, they started suggesting games, and one of the options was to chase ants in the street. The twins were talented people. They had already finished the academy and demonstrated their skills. Their rank is 2 in this house. They are the strongest after the Duke. And then Lilith told them she was too tired to play and wanted to eat. But she didn't want to go to the dining room saying that food there didn't taste good and that she craved something unusual. James appreciated the help, and then every day he came running and tried to help with something. However, that doesn't exist here, and the worried brothers started asking her what exactly she wanted. Her little sister wanted the food she used to eat with her dad when they lived in the old house. Teo suggested asking the cook to prepare it, but Leo opposed it, since his cooks don't know what common people eat, so they simply thought about going out to eat, and they suggested to their sister to go with them to a restaurant. There was still doubt about whether they would be allowed in. Their mother wouldn't let them go to a restaurant for commoners. One of the brothers was thinking about how to convince their mom, while Lilith was pushing him, saying she was really hungry. And then Leo realized they didn't need to ask for permission. They could just escape. To get out of the estate, they sneaked through a small hole in the fence. It was the only way to leave without being seen. Captain Teo had come up with that plan, and while crawling through the narrow tunnel, Lilith was glad she didn't have claustrophobia. Unfortunately, the kids couldn't make the hole any bigger because then it would be too noticeable. But the girl didn't give up, and soon she found herself on the other side of the fence after her brothers. Susan knew it was tough to raise a child alone, but the young man had learned a lot. The woman's story, even though she got really dirty, she didn't care about the mess. What mattered was that everything was going according to their plan. Then the brothers took their sister by the hands, getting ready to move on. Suddenly, one of the boys felt a sudden dizziness, and Lilith panicked. Her brother understood it was another attack, and suggested she rest to avoid issues. Teo assured her it was fine. This always happened 5 days after a headache. Now Lilith remembered she had a very rare illness, and that the attack would occur in 5 days, the role of one of the twins, destined to die in the original story. A stepping stone for Cheshire's growth, and a way to move the reader. That's why the kind-hearted Teo was conceived from the start, with a rare congenital disease. He must heal Cheshire, who closed off after the teasing and would leave once his task was fulfilled. Teo would fall ill from the mana collision, a rare disease that causes periodic seizures in the body. He will die in spring after being named a knight. In other words, he's living his last years. The boy noticed how worried Lilith was, an aristocrat. But she could also be a pawn of the empire, and looking at that sweet, innocent face, was interrupted by a red-haired bearded guy who cheerfully exclaimed that this time he had won the card game, and thought she felt bad too, but she assured him she was fine. Teo's illness is incurable, but there is a way to fight it that is in an ancient text. It mentions the heart of the saints, a simple metaphor. No one really knew what it referred to, but Cheshire deciphered it after Teo's death. He became obsessed with solving the riddle. In the end, he found the heart of the saint and took it to Teo's grave. Regretting being late, he suffered horrors to understand the message, and Lilith has no chance of finding it easily. But suddenly inspiration struck. She already knows what she needs. She's read the original 1,000 times, which means she can save him. He won't have to suffer or feel that horrible pain anymore. Lilith approached her little brother and asked him to buy her something nice, a treat. This was also part of the plan. They went to a specific street, and the girl pointed to a store. It's Will Duncan's shop, owned by an old swordsman and his young squire. The sign didn't look very reliable, but it was the biggest store in the alley. Lilith, he got a straight flush and laughed with his hoarse voice, getting excited like a little kid. Then he proceeded to collect all the nuts, was sure the Sacred Heart was there, and they entered. The seller greeted them kindly, and the kids immediately started looking around. They had never been in a place like this, and Lilith was already scheming on one of the shelves. She saw a small glass box. It was just what she needed. Then she turned to her brothers and declared that she wanted that cute little thing. Both the boys and the seller were horrified to see what the little girl had chosen as a gift. The liquid inside shimmered a purple color and looked like stars in a jar. Lilith was watching it fascinated from the outside. It seemed she had mistaken it for a toy. Then the seller explained that it was a monocore, and that it had been extracted from the body of a dead beast. He also explained that it wasn't suitable for a noble lady, and Leo added that it was very dangerous. The mana constantly leaks from the core, and carrying it with you makes you addicted. Now it's in a special glass box that partially seals the mana, and although Lilith swore she could handle it, Leo doubted it. She wasn't even at the academy, the girl insisted, and her brother was starting to get mad, asking her to stop complaining. But Lilith knew that there were 5 days left until Teo's attack, which were the stakes. But Lilith asked him to wait and put down her cards. She had an imperial flower, and there wouldn't be another chance she knows how to avoid the sickness, and doesn't want her brother to suffer from it. And since they wouldn't give in, she only had one option: to throw herself on the ground, kick and scream. The perfect moment to use her child privileges, because only a kid cries like that. In the end, the girl got what she wanted, and the monster's core was turned into a pendant. But the boys were worried when their mother finds out about the expense. She's going to kill them. Lilith interrupted their drama cheerfully, saying that she loved the gift. Then they headed to 13th Street in the Valentine district to the fancy restaurant when ordering food. The twins couldn't believe their sister ate that in front of them, but she loved it, and their dad frequented this restaurant. He was happy to find it. Then the brothers decided to order, and one of them called the waitress instantly and promised to pay double if the service was top-notch. The girl with the tray was getting ready to serve them, but Lilith suddenly stopped her. Leo whispered in her ear that she shouldn't raise her voice, and the bearded guy had to admit that this time he really lost. Then Lilith was going to wash the clothes, insisting that she could do it alone, to regular folks outside the house. But Teo asked her not to be so harsh. Grandpa wasn't around, and Lilith still hadn't gotten used to it. Leo explained that she needed to get used to it quickly. Grandpa would scold her if she messed up. Then the girl continued her mission and slipped a gold coin to the waitress, hoping not to abuse her power. But this place was disguised as a simple restaurant, and Lilith ordered something off the menu, actually. This place is the secret information brotherhood called Red Hawk, and the girl ordered sour herring, something that seemed very strange to her brothers. But Lilith didn't take her eyes off the waitress, and from her expression, she knew she had understood perfectly. However, she explained that they didn't serve that dish as a standalone, but would prepare it if the honorable guest desired it. This made Lilith happy, and he declared that he could share his secret recipe, and while they prepared it, he didn't need to be told twice. They immediately took her to the kitchen, which turned out to be completely empty. They went ahead, and the waitress, knocking on another door, she headed to someone named Rico, informing him that he had a visitor, when her aunt offered to do it for her. But the girl wanted to do something, so that when Dad returned, he would be pleasantly surprised. From there, a deep male baritone resonated, inviting them to enter. The door creaked open. Lilith was worried. She knows that guy hates those with power, skills, and status. He's the master of the Red Hawk Guild called Rico, and now he wore a pretty creepy mask. The mask stared at the girl with a horrible smile, and the voice from beneath it invited the girl to sit down in the room itself. The atmosphere was also devilishly terrifying. But Lilith entered cautiously and sat down in front of Rico. Before starting the conversation, she asked for a minute to catch her breath. But the man asked how she had found out about this place. The girl could have answered him, but she stated that first, he needed to give her some useful information. It was like a seller-buyer conversation, and she would pay not with money. But with information, Rico understood what she wanted, and withdrew his question. He wasn't going to pay for that. Then he suggested getting to the point, but if the guest needed information, she would first have to pay the commission for the deal. Lilith agreed and started by saying that Duke Rubenstein had returned to the capital after 7 years. Her aunt praised her for her diligence, but asked her at least to help carry the basket to the river. Rico already knew that, which meant she would have to tell him something different. Then she confessed to being Lilith, his 7-year-old daughter, but the masked man already knew that too. Then he leaned toward her, assuming she had come there just to have fun. And the girl confessed that she had actually come to ask him for a favor. Then she asked if it was true that he had a son, whom he was hiding from Marquisonics Rico, became curious about how the little girl who had arrived in the capital 4 days ago knew that and what purpose she had come for. He also heard that the tower personally came to verify her skills. Since she's a talented person, then Lilith confessed that she wanted to save a child, and asked him to relay the Marquis' secret. Not necessarily to her, she asked that it be relayed to anyone who could save Rico's son. Tim behind the mask understood that the young lady needed a messenger, and asked who the recipient would be. Lilith proudly declared that it was her father, the one and only Duke Enoch Rubenstein, for now Dad only knows the face of that boy. However, Lilith refused. It was Dad's clothes, so he will need time to find him. Then she explained that her father had recently returned and didn't know how things were. Plus, he has to deal with family matters at that moment. Rico smirked sarcastically, thinking that a 7-year-old girl couldn't have come alone, and assumed that the Duke had sent her. Lilith assured him that her dad knows nothing. That's why she asks to send the information anonymously. The voice under the mask didn't understand why she couldn't just tell the Duke herself what was happening. But then she would have to explain how she found out about everything. Rico understood that the little lady had a secret she didn't want to reveal to her father, but she suddenly blurted out that actually she was looking for a replacement, which sounded a bit suspicious. This meant that Rico had to inform Duke Enoch about the illegitimate son, and the girl confirmed his suspicion. But the man demanded to know more about Lilith for such a service. He wanted to know who this little girl really was, and where she got that information from, to which she simply explained that by hiding the name, no one would reveal her secret. Although not everyone understands it, since it's reckless to expect a girl to be so careless. She grabbed the basket and went with her little feet to the riverbank. Actually, James didn't like that his daughter washed clothes in secret, and Lilith admitted that she's not new to the business, to which the masked man just laughed. Even though the girl was completely serious, she has to reveal many secrets to Dad, and hopes that her dealings with Rico will be successful in the future. Right away, Rico corrected her, reminding her that he only deals with information, and Lilith continued saying that she knew everything, and assured that Mr. Rico would be satisfied with the collaboration. Then she pushed a small package towards him that he opened at a leisurely pace. Inside was a handful of herbs that emitted an almost imperceptible glow. It's a universal antidote. Lilith explained that it can cure Rico's younger sister's illness. The man held his head. He was always one step behind, but now for the first time, he was one step ahead. And then with more fury, he asked what the Rubensteins were plotting and how the Duke discovered his secret. Noticing Rico's anger, Lilith got a little scared, but assured him that her father knew nothing about this. But the man didn't believe her and was already pulling a knife from its sheath, and she started begging him to talk. But she planned to keep doing it. In her past life, she was an orphan, and this man took care of her devotedly, and immediately added angrily that she would handle everything herself and didn't need that guy's help. The man just laughed again and then made a cut on the palm of his hand. The little girl got really scared. She didn't understand what Rico was planning, and he immediately grabbed the handful of herbs, sure that the young Duchess knew. Recap manhwa. That's why she had taken out the miracle plant for him in seconds. The herb flew out of his hand and his wound healed without a trace. Only royalty knows this secret, and Madame Rubenstein will pay dearly if she messes with him calmer. Lilith urged him to use it discreetly, so as not to raise suspicions, and she prepared to leave, but Rico stopped her. After a few moments of silence, he decided to take off his mask. Lilith covered her eyes instantly, aware that seeing the leader's face would condemn her. Seeing her terror, Rico begged her to look at him, but she needed guarantees that he wouldn't kill her. The man reminded her that he always keeps his promises and pays all his debts. The moment Lilith gazed upon his beautiful black-haired face, Rico announced that the deal was done. He was everything to her, which is why Lilith wanted to grow up fast to help her beloved dad. Later, Rico visited his sick sister, and the waitress at the restaurant scolded him. She didn't think it was right for him to reveal his face. He was curious to know who those kids were. Rico just asked him to deliver information about Onyx's illegitimate son to Duke Rubenstein. The redhead didn't understand his behavior. Even his own sister wouldn't recognize him now. Surely the Duke is plotting something. He set up a charade for the girl while his sister suffered from the magic. Rico only begged her to think about his request. He repeated that he needed to deliver the information to the Duke. Furthermore, a dose of antidote isn't enough. She'll need more. In the meeting, Lilith asked him to trust her. Rico didn't know what she wanted him for, but she would give him the antidote so he could give in to such a request. He decided to trust her once. Although he was unaware of the consequences, he had been waiting a long time for a savior like this. And Lilith, upon returning home, was glad to have found Rico, who promised to contact them through a guild member. It could be one of the servants, and it would be good for the girl to have a man like Rico take care of her. However, Enoch decided he wouldn't allow it. One night, finally ready to act, with everything he needed. She loved this calm and peaceful life and wished it would never. She had already gotten pretty close to Yeti in June, who just appeared in her room upon seeing the little girl drawing. Yeti chose her art, thinking she had painted a jellyfish. In reality, Lilith was drawing her dad. The maid claimed that the portrait resembled the Duke. Then she asked the girl to try drawing something as well, and Lilith immediately offered her the pencils. Yeti doodled on the paper for a while, and in the end a very beautiful portrait of a girl appeared. Lilith loved the work. Both maids admitted that she was their friend Rachel. Rachel also worked as a maid on another estate like them, and she's a descendant of Onyx. Lilith felt extreme curiosity. She didn't understand what the Marquis Onyx had to do with all this. Thousands of thoughts ran through her head. She began to suspect who that girl could be. It had been a week since the Duke's return, and 7 days ago, they encountered a boy. Everyone treated him like someone of lower rank, but it caused unease for the Duke, and now he receives an anonymous letter, revealing that the boy is Onyx's illegitimate son. Enoch didn't believe it. But if they're really mistreating the little one, they need to find him now. The Duke didn't understand why that boy was precisely from that family with whom he had no connection. Ever end. She decided to enjoy this happiness until the day of world peace. But now he needs to find a way to visit those people as soon as possible. When Enoch finished reading the letter, his daughter arrived, and he knew her classes had already finished. The girl confessed that she loved the first class. When the teacher talked about famous sculptors and their works, then she opened a book and showed her dad the work of sculptor Lindell, called The Gates of Paradise. She would love to see that work in person, and the Duke promised to take her to the museum. But it turns out that work isn't in the museum. The teacher said the family of Marcus Onyx bought it, meaning that work is in their house. But the Duke cheered up his daughter again by saying that she has a chance to see him. He promised Lilith to arrange a trip, and soon they were in the Marquis's mansion courtyard. The Marquis welcomed them, and the Duke explained that his daughter wanted to see the artwork. Onyx gladly accepted and introduced the guests to his wife and son Jonathan. First, the Marquis greeted the guests. Then the young Marquis behaved very politely. But Lilith instantly recognized the wickedness of that boy. Although she suppressed her emotions, she only greeted him politely and even shook his hand. Until then, all she had left was to be happy. She often compared this life with the previous one, even though it disgusted her to do so. His fake kindness seemed sincere even to her own father. All the adults noticed that the children were getting along, which even embarrassed Jonathan. The Marquise asked her son to be nice to the lady, since they would see each other often, and who knows what might happen in the future. Listening to his mother, Jonathan offered to show Lilith the artwork, and his father bragged about having taught the maids to behave properly. All the maids stood still with expressionless faces, but the girl decided to greet them immediately. Jonathan tried to stop her, but she ignored him. She just asked the maids to take care of her. The maids seemed to unfreeze and agreed to take the little guest to see the gates of paradise. Then one of the maids took the girl by the hand and discreetly passed her. A key and a note probably in that note. Is written the location of the room we need. Lilith headed to the picture gallery with Jonathan, to whom his father had given some instructions. He needs to impress the Duke, because that will help him make good connections by showing Lilith one of the paintings. And she liked this one way more. While washing the clothes, Lilith suddenly heard the sound of hooves. The boy explained that it was from the same era as the author Lindell, but the girl seemed not to be listening and was running around the room, examining everything, which drove him crazy. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have been so nice. But now he must take care of this girl, realizing he needs to calm down. He took a deep breath, because this girl can change his life. Then he invited her to move to the next room, but he noticed that there was no trace of her left. Jonathan only cursed. This girl was irritating him more and more. Lilith remembered that at the end of the exhibition hall on the 3rd floor, there was a side door, and behind it, a secret passage that's exactly where the little girl was heading, hoping to find Cheshire there, who was being held on the 2nd floor of the basement in the adjacent room. Meanwhile, that boy lay on a tattered rug on the floor, trembling completely, feeling unwell. He remembered that his mother had died unable to bear it, and continued praying to die himself. He wanted to reunite with his mother soon, and then saw some riders approaching. It wasn't clear why they had come, and almost immediately, for a moment he even thought he saw her ghost leaning over him. He even felt her touch and jumped up, barely catching his breath that he was missing at that moment. Besides Cheshire, he remembered Jonathan's warning not to get close to the Duke, and that no one should know about him. Now the boy felt like nothing could save him, and that he was simply destined to die. Then he remembered the girl he had seen in the alley. He worried about his wounds and the warmth he felt from her. Cheshire suddenly decided to pray to God to send him a little angel, to get him out of this hell. At that moment, the boy who had already despaired suddenly felt an enormous desire to live, and then as if by magic the door opened, letting in a beam of light into the dark room. Cheshire saw the silhouette of a girl. It was the same girl he had seen in the alley, and she promised to take him out of there. The boy recognized her, but couldn't understand how she'd gotten there, and thought he was just imagining it. And Lilith approached him, and in the ray of light that fell, he saw recent bruises on her face. One of them covered the girl with a shadow, and they noticed the Imperial emblem. So it was the Imperial Army. But now that wasn't the most important thing. They had to get out of there as soon as possible. The girl realized that she should have ignored everything and brought her father here from the beginning for Cheshire. Every minute in that place was hell, and Lilith felt guilty all that week, that for her was happiness. At the same time it was hell for Cheshire, she immediately apologized. Even though he didn't understand why, if she didn't even know him. He was more surprised that she couldn't hold back and cried as if someone had hurt her. But quickly wiping her tears, Lilith reached out her hand and asked him to follow her. Cheshire now understood that she wanted to get him out of there. But he wanted to know who that little angel was. He didn't believe that such a little person could get him out of that hell, and he asked her directly who she was. The girl introduced herself, but Cheshire didn't need her name. Then she promised to tell him everything. But first they had to get out of that gloomy place. She also assured him that if he went with her, his life would be much better than their. Cheshire still looked at the visitor with some distrust, and these were the Blue Knights. They were second in the night class ranking and the one right above the little girl. He still thought it was an illusion. Still, he reached out his hand to her, and she was happy that this boy finally found peace, and when he grabbed her, Lilith was even a little surprised by how tightly he held on to her. Then she started convincing him to go with her, apologizing again for arriving so late, and promised that now nothing would cause him pain, and that she would teach those scoundrels a lesson. After this, Cheshire left the little room and then ran down the stairs ahead of Lilith. He just had very short legs, and now he could barely keep up with her, and asked her to wait on the upstairs floor. Cheshire looked around the corner. There was no one, but they could run into a couple of servants. The girl wasn't scared. She was sure that if they saw them, it wouldn't be a big deal. The important thing was not to get caught. They moved on now. She had to leave the key with which she opened the little room. The same one that the maid gave her had to be left in the second hole of the hallway window. Finding the right window, ordered them to capture her while he looked at her, squinting as if he had found a dangerous enemy. The girl wanted to leave the key, but her short stature wouldn't allow it. Cheshire understood what she was trying to do, and taking her hand, he placed the key on the windowsill himself. The girl was happy they were in sync, and now they had to move forward with their plan. Meanwhile, Jonathan was looking for the girl and involved the servants, who suggested looking for her in the street. And there, the young Marquis saw her running with her half-brother, whom he hated more than anyone. He was even more surprised that that idiot had escaped, and Lilith, with an innocent face, declared that she had found a new friend. Jonathan was already boiling and demanded they return to the room, but the girl suggested playing hide-and-seek, then pushed Cheshire, asking him to run away from there. While the young Marquis ordered the servants to capture him immediately, the servants obeyed the order and ran after the fugitive. But Lilith decided to get in the way, but Jonathan grabbed her by the neck immediately, demanding in an imperative tone that she stay still, then realized his mistake, let her go, and kindly asked her to wait there. He had been hunting for a long time. The girl looked a bit scared at his blue cloak, realizing she had to try to escape. However, the girl had no intention of doing so. It was the perfect moment to try to escape. But as soon as she took the first step, the young Marquis tripped her, causing the girl to fall to the ground in an instant, hitting her chin really hard. Now she hated Jonathan for treating a girl with such cruelty. The sound of her fall made Cheshire stop, but the girl shouted for him to run anyway. But he didn't hear her at all. Instead, he ran back past the servants who were chasing him. Jonathan was stunned, not understanding what was happening to that idiot whose eyes were filled with fury. At that moment, the young Marquis was about to order him back to the shack, but he couldn't, because he received a brutal kick to the head. The blow sent him flying instantly, and Cheshire crouched down next to Lilith, who was grumbling for not having listened to him. The boy said nothing. He simply took her by the hand, and then something incredible happened in the blink of an eye. They were in the street, and Lilith realized that he knew how to teleport. And while Jonathan shouted to catch those brats, they kept running, but she was still very small. She wouldn't make it, and that man had already grabbed her by the neck but now on foot, originally, all the abilities belonged to the protagonists, and Cheshire had slow-motion power. Now he understood that it wasn't teleportation. He could simply control time, and if he wanted, his opponent's movements would be like in slow motion. The girl was happy to now have protectors like her dad, and Cheshire only had a small mess left. Meanwhile, the Marquis was telling the Dukes the rumors that had circulated during his absence, but he assured that any father would understand why and with what intentions. Enoch took the little lady 7 years ago while the Duke was lost in his thoughts. There wasn't a trace of another child in the house. He asked about the kids and the Marquis. He admitted that there had always been few in his family. Onyx's reaction was predictable, and Enoch knew he had to search for a secret room. To do this, he asked to see the exhibition room, and the Marquis even agreed to be his guide at that moment. A scream of anguish from Lilith was heard through the door, and the Duke knew something was wrong. Both men went to see what was happening. He took the baby in his arms and snuck out of the castle. The girl looked at him with her huge blue eyes and smiled, not understanding anything yet. Ruffley brought a scepter close to her, which immediately lit up. The knight understood that this girl had a gift. They also heard Jonathan's voice. Upon opening the door, they saw Lilith and Cheshire running. They were being chased by the young Marquis at full speed. The girl ran towards her father. Pointing at the boy and pretending that they probably invited him too, Onyx turned pale with rage. But Enoch was intrigued by how the 7-year-old girl had found him, as they were supposed to be hiding Cheshire. Lilith, like any girl, bragged about her big house with many rooms in one of which she found a friend. But the Duke knew she was just acting, and he was also worried about the boy's poor condition. Something didn't add up. He began to ask questions, and his daughter confessed that she found him in the basement. That room smells terrible and is full of mice. The Marquis, not knowing what to do, started to think of a way to get out of this messed up situation, but nothing convincing came to mind.
He barely contained his rage that his prisoner was free. What a disaster.
Meanwhile, Enoch understood that before him was an illegitimate son that Onyx was hiding. What a secret! The atmosphere grew tense, and that she was actually the daughter of Enoch Rubenstein. He could have told just by looking at her and Lilith upon hearing about the gift. The Duke asked the Marquis to speak privately. The truth was about to come out. Lilith and Cheshire were sent to wait in another room, and the girl trusted that Daddy would solve everything. She pulled out the ointment Rochelle had given her, along with the key and a note, a mysterious gift. Then the little girl asked Cheshire to lower his head so she could heal his wounds, but he refused. The girl reassured him, saying it wouldn't hurt at all. She would just put some ointment on the bruise. When he agreed, she thanked him for not abandoning her. She asked him why he had so many wounds. He could have dodged the hits, but the boy took his time to answer. He then explained that if he had dodged, it would have only made them angrier, and he had nowhere to run. That's why he has to endure everything in this house to avoid starving on the streets. This young man is only 11 years old. And despite his talents, he lacks any legal status. It's tough. Surviving in this empire under such circumstances is difficult, and Lilith apologized for the nonsense she had just said. Suddenly, Cheshire spoke about his father, began to suspect that something was wrong. She started to struggle and demand that they let her go, declaring that she didn't know any Enoch Rubenstein. He heard from Jonathan that the Marquis plans to get close to the Duke. The girl declared that her dad would never do something like that with those who hit kids, and that they came to see the painting. She also confessed that their true goal was not the artwork, but Cheshire proudly proclaimed that she came to save him, and Rachel warned her that he was right there. Hearing this, the boy was outraged, not understanding why Lilith was looking for him, without even knowing who he was. Lilith herself got annoyed, not understanding why he was still being so stubborn. Then she reminded him that they had met before. She was sure he was just pretending not to recognize her. All the time, the girl thought of him and wanted to see him. She didn't need a reason to appreciate him. Smiling cheerfully, the young Duchess confessed that she liked him just because. In response, Cheshire coldly declared that the girl simply considered him her toy, and for that, she would feed him and give him a place to sleep. These words outraged Lilith. She spoke with total sincerity and didn't understand why Cheshire was so skeptical. Then she began to scold him childishly, saying that a person is not a toy, and that he was talking nonsense. She actually remembered that name perfectly, but didn't understand why it was coming up right now in the novel. He was the commander of an order of knights. With her hand on her heart, the young lady declared that she wanted to be his true friend, but Cheshire still didn't believe her. She's the Duke's daughter, and they simply couldn't be friends for a while. They argued a bit about this, and Lilith defended her point of view at that moment. Enoch Rubenstein approached them and addressed his daughter directly. The girl was happy and ran towards him. While the Duke and Cheshire stared at each other, Enoch suggested they go home. And not just him and Lilith. Cheshire also had to go with them. Once at the mansion, the Duke asked them to wait a bit in the hallway. He first needed to talk to the grandfather. He also asked the kids to remain quiet and not tell anyone anything, no matter who asked, but before he could enter the study, they saw the twins pass by. Leo and Uncle immediately started asking who that boy was, and Lilith introduced him as Cheshire. The Duke came closer and explained that he was his daughter's new friend, and that from now on he would live with them. The most powerful military force, a magnificent wizard and swordsman, but Leo immediately asked about his family, to which Enoch confessed that he was a commoner at that moment. Cheshire felt very uncomfortable, as if he were a painting that everyone was examining closely, and the Duke asked everyone again to be quiet. While he spoke with the grandfather, he reminded them not to say anything to anyone in the meantime. Leo noticed how Lilith tenderly held that boy's hand and felt something strange. Then Enoch left, and Leo grabbed his sister's hand. He reminded her of their promise to go spider hunting today. The girl hesitated a bit because she wanted Cheshire to go with them, too. It seemed this upset Leo, since they were supposed to go spider hunting just the two of them. Lilith didn't understand why Leo was acting this way today. In the original story, when she met Cheshire, they became close. Now there was a strong tension in the air that kept rising. But then Teo intervened. Wanting to get to know the guest well, he extended his hand in greeting. Leo just made a face at that moment. Then he declared that the boy stunk, although Lilith felt nothing. Cheshire even started to discreetly sniff himself. He lost his daughter to the imperial family, and one day he took revenge. It was then that he took and raised another male character, Jesse, who became one of the two protagonists. At that moment, the Duke appeared, who heard the last words and suggested to the guest to go take a bath. He asked the twins to play with Lilith for a while, and taking Cheshire by the hand, he led him to the bathroom. And Lilith started to ask Leo what was up with him today, and why he kept staring at Cheshire. He even made a comment. But even if he stunk, there's no need to say it so loud. Then the girl assumed her brother was acting that way because of that boy's background. But he insisted that he just said what it was and that Cheshire smelled bad. Mateo decided to end this childish argument, knowing it wouldn't end well. Then Lilith clarified that this had nothing to do with Cheshire and that Leo talked like that to everyone. But the girl didn't calm down, saying it was a bad habit, and demanded he not behave that way with his new friend. This only infuriated Leo more, who felt his sister had sided with a dirty commoner. He even accused her of lying, since she had gone to see a painting, and instead brought a new friend home. Defending Cheshire, Lilith explained he had nowhere to go, and if Leo had a problem with that, he should tell her. Now, Lilith felt like everything was happening before the original events, and her daughter was probably still alive. The boy didn't want to argue much with his sister and simply turned around, crossing his arms nervously, and then he just walked out and didn't hear what Lilith was trying to explain. It seemed like even his brother didn't recognize him, and the girl was bewildered, not understanding why everything was going like this. The Duke recalled the meeting with the Marquis, who asked him to handle the matter carefully if Cheshire bored the lady, or simply wasn't necessary to prevent any strange rumors. Onyx explained that for nobility like them, reputation is vital, and he hoped Enoch would understand that. Now he took Cheshire to the bathroom, and while undressing, the Duke was horrified to see the bruises all over his body. Still, he didn't touch the delicate subject. He wanted the boy to not be afraid, and even decided to bathe with him later. He confessed he hadn't bathed with his daughter in a year, because she had grown and it embarrassed him for Cheshire. It was strange to hear they used to bathe together, but after all, they are father and daughter. The Duke decided to show his paternal care again, and lathered the boy's head with shampoo. Suddenly, the boy asked if it was true that the Duke had ordered him killed. This shocked Enoch. She didn't know how it would affect her, but she started declaring that the Blue Knight had gotten everything wrong, and Cheshire confessed he knew everything, and that he only survived because of his daughter. He also saw how the nobility took other commoners, only to throw them out and kill them, and lowering his swollen eyes from the bruises. The boy also declared he wanted to ask the Duke for something. Cheshire asked the Duke for some money, promising to leave and not bother when he grew up and found a job. Enoch noticed the boy had rehearsed those words a lot, and was only 11 years old then. With a soothing voice, he explained that the kids don't have to work. He didn't bring the boy to work, let alone to please his daughter. If Cheshire wanted to leave, the Duke wouldn't stop him. He just couldn't ignore what was happening. Knowing that the boy still distrusted him, Enoch assured him he could ask for anything he needed later on. The Duke met with his father, who after a brief chat gave his consent. Enoch found it strange that he agreed so easily, after 7 years of separation, and so many issues he had even prepared to persuade Nordic, thinking he would oppose. But he reminded him that his son would do what he wanted. The old man simply didn't want pointless arguments, so he asked his son to handle everything on his own. Then she pretended that her head was spinning. Besides, he noticed that Enoch was much more lenient. As a child, he argued a lot. The old Duke struggled with his son, who always questioned everything to understand. Fortunately, Enoch had already grown up and started following the rules. But he never understood the absurdity of the system in high society. He just felt the duty to obey his father, who always felt guilty about that. Nordic really forced him to obey, and now he regrets it, realizing he shouldn't have done so. If he had known it would all end in 7 years of disappearance, he would have never acted that way. After the conversation, Enoch thanked his father for his decision, because if he had been more insistent, everything could have been different. He's terrified to think that if he had defeated the old man back then, the kids might not even exist. He's really grateful to his father, because after Lilith's birth, his life changed. Enoch understood for the first time that life is worth it, and seeing his daughter every day, he knows what happiness is. Now he wants to create the best world for Lilith. Although he knows it won't be easy, his father encouraged him and promised not to interfere, and that blood was going to come out of her nose if he didn't put it back in place. In doing so, he examined her black hair and blue eyes. In this recap manhwa, there was someone similar in the novel. Even more so, when he has one foot in the grave, Nordic allows his son to do as he pleases. Even if Enoch destroys everything, he won't intervene. Recap manhwa. For a moment, silence reigned in the office, and suddenly the young duke burst out laughing. Meanwhile, Lilith was drawing with Cheshire, and her skill seemed amazing. I doubt anyone else can see a book and then draw. Such an incredible jellyfish. But the boy modestly said that his talents weren't that great, something the twin denied. Then she felt curious to know why Lilith hadn't drawn the jellyfish herself. If she suggested it upon seeing his drawing, Cheshire explained that it wasn't a jellyfish. The image resembled her father. The girl was surprised, since everyone says she looks like a jellyfish, but her friend thinks differently. Now she can show the drawing to her father without problems and to Cheshire. The Duke's words about his daughter echoed in her mind. Enoch believes his daughter is super talented and confessed that he will soon go practice. What excitement the Duke felt uneasy sending her alone. And if Cheshire went with her, he would feel more at ease.